So let's begin today with this week's Parsha. It is called Parshat Metzora, which continues on the discussion of last week, where we spoke about this unique kind of disease where a person's skin turned white. And the Torah tells us, and when their skin turned white, they had to go outside the camp or outside the city, and they were considered tamei, ritually impure. We mentioned that last week's Parsha and this week's Parsha go through various laws of ritual impurity, of tum'ah. It begins by telling us the process of the person with tzarat becoming pure. There's a process to how they cleanse themselves from their impurity. They take two birds. One is slaughtered. The other bird, together with a cedar branch, a red thread, and a hyssop, is dipped into the blood of the slaughtered bird, which is mixed with spring water, and then sprinkled on the individual. Then they wait a week, and after this week, they must shave all their hair, and they come to the temple, and they offer 3 sacrifices, and then along with oil that is sprinkled on them as well. And they also have an option for 2 of the sacrifices. Instead of offering lambs, they can offer birds. Then the Torah continues to tell us that in addition to tzarat on this skin disease that goes on one's skin, and we mentioned in last week's parsha also that it can go on one's clothing. The clothing turn a reddish or yellowish color, and that is also tzarat. There can also be tzarat on a home, on the stones of a home in the land of Israel. And it goes through the various laws of what happens. If it is indeed tzarat, the stones must be removed. And if it comes back, that the entire home must be destroyed. The Torah then goes on to discuss a number of other ritual impurities. It discusses the impurity of as we mentioned last week, that all these impurities are relevant when the temple stood. If someone was ritually impure, they were forbidden from entering the temple, from offering sacrifices, from eating sacrificial meat, or eating other holy foods, such as the truma. Excuse me. There was a disease called zav, that a man had this unusual discharge, and they were considered tamei, with various rules depending on how long they saw the discharge. And then we're told also that when a man has a regular seminal discharge, he becomes tamei and has to go to the mikveh and wait until evening to become tahor. The same as after a couple has relations. The woman becomes tamei from the semen and has to go to the mikveh. And then we're told also that a woman who, when she gets her menstrual cycle, is a nida and is tamei for 7 days and must then go to the mikveh. If she sees blood outside her regular menstrual cycle, she has a different kind of tumah called a zava, and depending on how long she saw it for, she must count some clean days, 1 or 7, and go to the mikveh. Again, all of these laws were, when a person was tamei, they were forbidden from entering the temple, eating sacrificial meat, or eating any other holy food, such as truma, that we don't have anymore. So therefore, largely, all these laws are not relevant today. The one relevance of these laws today is a woman who has a menstrual cycle or spots, where under Jewish law today, anytime a woman has her cycle or spots, she must wait for 7 clean days. And during that period, she is forbidden to have relations until she counts 7 clean days and goes to the mikveh. And so for that, although we don't use mikvahs for all the other laws of ritual purity, we do still have a mikveh. Mikveh is just Hebrew for a pool. And according to our laws, in order for it to be a kosher mikveh, there is it needs to be, the water must arrive there naturally, without a human carrying the water. And we have various, it's an engineering feat to build a mikveh where we get the water to arrive there naturally. But today, every Jewish community has a mikveh used, again, primarily by women after they bleed, in order and to count 7 clean days, because in order to be able to be pure for her husband, so for marriage. And so that is the one thing for which all these laws of ritual purity still is relevant. We've previously done a class on the laws of the nida and a couple separating while a woman spots or has her menstrual cycle. We've also previously done a class on the mikveh, and we even once did a mikveh tour. Some of you, I think, were here. We went down to the mikveh that we have here in this building for you to see it. So that is our parsha in short. Let's take some questions. Yes, Steve?
All right. So after the 7 days and the woman goes to the mikvah, are you saying that she then has sex with her husband? She has to go again?
No. Two different things. There's the laws of ritual purity, which means that you cannot eat sacrificial meat or enter the temple. Ritual purity includes a seminal discharge, both a man who discharges semen or a woman who has semen enter her because she had relations with her husband. In both instances, they are ritually impure in that they cannot enter the temple or eat sacrificial meats or other holy foods. Again, we mentioned that the laws of ritual impurity no longer apply because we don't have a temple. We don't have sacrificial meat. We don't have holy foods. So all of these laws are no longer relevant and will not be relevant until the temple is rebuilt. The only subgroup of these laws that is still relevant is the laws of a woman who sees blood or gets her menstrual cycle, and where she must count 7 clean days in order for her to be able to be with her husband. That is the only thing for which it is relevant today. And that is the only thing for which, or the primary thing for which a mikveh is used today. Yes, Debbie?
Why, when a woman is going through her menstrual cycle, why is that called impure when that's a natural thing?
Excellent question. Why is it called impure? We just spoke about that when we did the class on Nida, on a family, what we call today family purity. The short answer, since I don't want to leave you without an answer, is that all the laws of ritual purity are chukim, or laws that we have no rhyme or reason for, just like all the laws of kosher. They're laws without any rhyme or reason. They're not logical. That is what God told us to do, and that is what we do. We've mentioned multiple times, we did a class dedicated to this, why many laws make no sense, many mitzvahs make no sense. I think we called it that. And we explained that there are some commandments, like eating matzah on Passover. We know exactly why we eat matzah, to remember how they ate matzah when they left Egypt. We have other mitzvahs that we have no reason for. The Torah just says, this is what you do. God said to do it, so that's what we do. We don't know why. That's a short answer. So in addition to the Parsha this week, this Shabbat is referred to as Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Shabbat. Great Shabbat, so it is the Shabbat before Passover. It is called Great Shabbat, our sages say, because in Egypt itself, on the Shabbat before Passover, or 5 days before Passover, which was a Shabbat, they were commanded by God that every Jew or every Jewish family take a lamb and separate it, and they would offer this lamb as a Passover sacrifice, but they had to separate it on the 10th day of the month, or 4 days before they would actually offer the sacrifice. And this was on Shabbat according to our tradition, and so many Egyptians, particularly the Egyptian firstborns, who saw them separating this animal and were told that the animal is being separated because they're going to offer it as a sacrifice. And this animal is going to be, it's going to be offered as a sacrifice, and it's going to be, and it's going to save them from the plague that's going to kill all firstborns. So the firstborns in particular weren't thrilled to hear about that, especially given that Moses had a pretty good track record by then. He already predicted and carried out 9 plagues. He already predicted and carried out 9 plagues, and so that led to a battle among the Egyptians with each other. And so many Egyptians were harmed, and that made it easier for Israel to leave later. And so that is celebrated and also the Egyptians did not attack Israel for separating the lamb, although the Egyptians themselves worship the lamb. And so for all of that, we celebrate Shabbat before Passover as the Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Shabbat. It was also, we have a tradition on the Shabbat Hagadol to do a little practice run of the Haggadah. So we read the Haggadah on Shabbat, just to do it. The Haggadah is the thing that we read, of course, at the Seder. And so we do a little practice run. We also, there's also a custom before, it's somewhat of a modern thing today that rabbis give sermons in the synagogue, fairly modern 20th century invention. Historically, the synagogue was just for praying, and rabbis rarely gave sermons in Jewish communities. But on Shabbat Hagadol, the Shabbat before Passover, it's an old tradition, at least in Ashkenazi communities, that the rabbi always gave a pre-Passover sermon in the synagogue. So that was also what Shabbat was famous for. Today it's not unique because most synagogues, rabbis tend to give sermons every week. So that's this Shabbat. I'll just mention that coming up this week, and then we'll talk a little bit about Passover next week. And then we'll get to our topic for today. So coming up this coming Friday is the 11th of the month of Nisan, which is the Rebbe's birthday. It would be his 122nd birthday. He was born in 1902. And we continue celebrating his birthday every year. And we will be celebrating here at a Shabbat dinner. We have a famous speaker, Rabbi Moshe Kaplan, coming from New York, from I think it was in the Hamptons, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in Long Island. And he's going to be coming here to speak and inspire us. So join us this coming Friday night. If you have not yet signed up for it, please do so as soon as possible. Yes, Steve?
Yeah, so you said it was Rebbe's 122nd birthday, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it suggests that you donate multiples of 123. So.
He's entering his 123rd year. We always add one more. Why not? So then this coming Monday night, sorry, not this coming, a week from tomorrow night, Monday night, will be the first night of Passover. So I'm going to go into more detail about Passover next Sunday, but just a little bit for now. Firstly, as I already mentioned last week, it's important that every Jew go to a Seder, not one Seder, but two Seders in the diaspora. We do two Seders, the first night, which is Monday night, and Tuesday night. So if you are making a Seder at home, make sure to invite others. If you're going to a Seder, that's great. If you don't have plans for a Seder, or you happen to know another Jew that does not have plans for a Seder, please invite them to come here. We would love for them to come. We are charging a fee because Seders are super expensive because you have to pay for Passover food, which is ridiculously expensive for whatever reason. However, we do not want any Jew to miss out on the Seder. So anyone for whom that fee is challenging in any way, please let me know, and everyone can come. At the beginning of our Seder, we invite anyone who's hungry to come and eat. And so anyone who needs a place for the Seder, please let me know, and you're more than welcome to come as my guest. You just have to give me a heads up. So if you are making your own Seder and you won't be here, or you're going to stay home and do a Seder by yourself for whatever reason, which you can do if you choose to, and I'll talk more about the details of what to do next week, then it's important that one have the handmade shmura matzah at the Seder. I've mentioned this before, that the matzah should be made with the intent of it being used for the mitzvah, and the commercially produced matzah doesn't do that, because it's commercially produced and the machines don't know what they're doing. So therefore, one should have the handmade shmura matzah. We've been giving it out. A number of you have helped us out and gave out the shmura matzah for your Jewish neighbors. If anyone wants to give out more matzah, we have more to give out. And some of those that we're going to give out canceled and aren't able to. So we definitely, some have already given out more than once. So we appreciate that. But if for yourself, I have brought shmura matzah here, and anybody who likes, I will give you a box of 2 matzahs. There's 2 matzahs in the box, one that you can use each night, so that you can have a shmura matzah on the first night of Passover and on the second night of Passover. Matzah has only 2 ingredients, flour and water.
So when it's commercial?
It's the same ingredients. The only differences may be the temperatures of the oven, the exact makeup of how much flour, how much water. Otherwise, it's the exact same. Yes?
I think the shmura matzah tastes 10 times better.
Okay, I guess that's a matter of opinion. In Hebrew, we say one can never debate about taste or smell. Yes?
Can you make your own?
Make your own shmura matzah. That is an excellent question. Rabbi David downstairs right now is doing a shmura matzah factory, and he teaches children how matzah is made. However, in order to make shmura matzah, you need a oven that can get to about 5,000 degrees. So if you have access to such an oven, then you definitely can make your own, and you have the equipment. There's also a lot of special equipment needed, but if you have access to that kind of oven and have that kind of equipment, then you definitely can make your own. I think a pizza oven gets to about 2,000 degrees, nowhere near close to hot enough. You need a much better oven. It's called a baker's oven, actually, for a reason.
Not even like with a pizza stone?
Pizza stone won't do it, no. Pizza ovens don't get it that hot.
Oh, okay. Do you know where the secret location is for the South Redondo one?
Oh, it's at Alta Vista Park. It's not a secret.
At the school?
At the park. There's a community center at the park.
Outside?
No, indoors, in the community center.
Indoors in the community center.
At the Alta Vista Park. Okay, so before Passover, just a few things before Passover. On Passover, we are not supposed to eat chametz. Now, there's two parts to not eating chametz. There's two prohibitions regarding chametz, I should say. One prohibition is not to eat chametz. And while normally when we have various foods that we're not allowed to eat year-round, right, non-kosher foods that we're not allowed to eat, a long list of foods that are not kosher. However, if there's a minuscule amount of non-kosher food gets mixed into your food, it's okay. You don't worry about it. However, unless it impacts the taste in some way or another, and we have various rules as to how to define that. However, when it comes to Passover, we have to be super careful that not even the smallest amount of chametz gets into our food. So that's one prohibition with regard to Passover. The second prohibition is we are not allowed to own any chametz or have any chametz in our homes on Passover. So to fulfill the first prohibition, in other words, to avoid eating any chametz, firstly, we must only purchase products for Passover that are certified as kosher for Passover. Even if it's certified as kosher year-round, that doesn't necessarily make it kosher for Passover. You need to have only products that are kosher for Passover. Here, the stores have very small kosher for Passover sections, but if you go to the west side, there's many Jewish stores that have large kosher for Passover, or all the kosher grocery stores are selling almost exclusively kosher for Passover food. And there are lots of options with our modern technology today. You can make all sorts of wonderful stuff, even breads made out of potato starch and things like that are kosher for Passover, and you can eat them on Passover. We also clean out our kitchens to make sure there is no chametz left in our kitchen. If you do want to keep any chametz for after Passover, we'll talk about that shortly, how to sell it. But we clean out our kitchen, clean out our fridges, clean out our stoves, clean off the counters, clean out our pantries, make sure that there is no chametz except anything that we want to keep for after Passover we can put away and sell that, and we'll soon talk about what to do with that. But we want to make sure there's no chametz whatsoever in our kitchen. We also then have to go through a koshering process to kosher our things for Passover. So you can kosher pots, not pans. You can kosher pots, dishes, and cutlery. It was widely done until, and I think we've done a class on koshering before, until I would say 30 years ago, 40 years ago, most Jewish communities for thousands of years had a koshering service where everyone would bring their pots and their bowls. You may remember this, some of you. Bring your bowls and your cutlery and all your different things to the synagogue, and they would have these massive pots of hot water, and they would dip them all with these big nets, and they would dip them in the hot water, and they would kosher them for you. And that was widely done. It is not done anymore for a simple reason. Plastic goods and even pots have become so cheap in modern times that no one wants to go through the hassle of koshering it, and essentially these koshering services that synagogues offered basically went out of business because nobody was interested in them anymore, because for your plates you could buy gorgeous plastic plates that look like, or disposable plates that look nicer than the china and the gorgeous cutlery, disposable cutlery that looks nicer than the silverware, and gorgeous cups that look nicer than the glass cups, and you can buy pots. You could go to a place like Home Goods and buy a pot for $25. So for that, it doesn't really pay to have a whole koshering service. And so that's why it's not done anymore. It can still theoretically be done. I don't recommend you try it on your own. It's a very difficult thing to do. You need to know the laws. We don't offer the service, again, because people don't really need it. And if you want to get, you can very easily get plenty of kosher plastic goods, disposable goods, and you can get plenty of kosher, and you can get new pots, pans. Pans anyway cannot really be kosher, and it's not hard to get new ones. There, you could go. There's plenty of stores that sell them for fairly cheap. You buy them once, you have them, you keep them from year to year for Passover. Your kitchen, however, does need to be kosher. Your counters need to be kosher. The way you could kosher your counters, you have one of two options. The harder way to do it, and the way they did it traditionally, was you take boiling water and you pour it over your counters. Well, you could only kosher some counters. Only if the counter is wood, which is pretty rare today, or if it is granite, then you can kosher it. Quartz is debatable. If it is tile, which many counters are, or porcelain, sinks, you would not be able to kosher them with boiling water. What do you do if you have something that cannot be koshered, or you simply don't want to boil these massive pots of hot water and pour it all over your kitchen and make a big mess? People used to do it. It wasn't, they just did it. But now there's a simpler solution, which is you can just take something and use it to take foil or take something and just cover your counter. And if you cover your counter, then you don't have a problem. Or there's an even simpler solution, and that is if you don't put anything, if you clean your counter well and you don't put down anything hot, then you're just fine, right? As long as no food touches the counter directly and you put your pots down on top of what are they called? Trivets. Then you have nothing to worry about and you don't need to have a kosher counter. Sink is more of an issue if you want to wash your dishes. But again, if you don't use boiling water, you will be fine, and you don't put any food in your sink. You're not making pasta on Passover anyway. That's usually the only kind of food you put in your sink. So, right, because pasta's not kosher for Passover. It's made out of wheat. Or other grains, and so that's how you would kosher your sinks, and that's what you would do with your sinks and tabletop and countertops. Your tabletop, you just need a different tablecloth, right? Just use a kosher Passover tablecloth. For your stovetops, you don't really need to kosher your stovetops, just clean them because the fire burns away anything that's there. Your oven is a challenge. Ovens need to be kosher. Today, most ovens are self-clean ovens. Self-clean ovens are very easy to kosher because it needs to get to in order to be kosher, it needs to get about 600-700 degrees, and your self-clean oven usually gets over 1,000 degrees when you put it onto self-clean mode. And so all you have to do is self-clean it, and your oven is just like that. It's kosher. If you don't have a self-clean oven, it's a challenge because it's a challenge to kosher it. My suggestion is the next best thing is turn it on to the highest that it will go. Leave it once it reaches that highest for a half hour, and then your kitchen was about as kosher your oven is as kosher as you can realistically get it. If you can get new racks, that's ideal. Again, if you have a self-clean, no need, because the racks get kosher too, because they sit in the self-clean oven when you clean it. But if you can get new racks, that's ideal. If not, you're good enough like that. So that's how to kosher your kitchen for Passover, and one should do that in order to make sure that they don't eat any chametz on Passover. Yes?
What about your dishwasher?
Dishwasher, I would not recommend koshering your dishwasher for Passover. It can be done if you really, really need it, but if you could avoid it, it's hard to kosher dishwashers. It's debatable whether they could be kosher. So I would recommend not koshering it, if possible. If you could manage 8 days without a dishwasher. I don't know how many dishes you use.
Just do it.
Yes.
Question about bread. So if I have gluten-free bread, is that okay?
That is an excellent question. Is gluten-free bread chametz? So, firstly, people ask about gluten-free matzah. Some people have celiac disease and cannot eat matzah. Today they have gluten-free oat matzah, and that is matzah. Oats can be chametz. You have to be careful. If it's gluten-free but it's oats, it is chametz. In addition, a couple years ago we did a class on kitniyot. Ashkenazic Jews and many Sephardic Jews have a custom not to eat various other grains and beans over Passover. So chances are, depending on what it is, gluten-free things often are made out of other grains, corn, for example, which we don't eat on Passover. Ashkenazic Jews don't eat on Passover. Many gluten-free things, though, today, in fact, I would even venture to say a majority of gluten-free things today are actually made from potato starch. Because modern use of potato starch has become so efficient that we can really turn it into anything and much better. It makes much better breads than other grains. So, and potato starch, of course, is just fine on Passover. The thing is, you need to check that it was made kosher for Passover. Because if it's not certified kosher for Passover, you have no idea what's in it, and you don't know that it's kosher for Passover. Because you don't know what they put in these things.
Well, you look at the ingredients.
Ingredients means nothing. Because you don't know what they put in these things. Because there's little things that are mentioned in the ingredients, because the ingredients themselves can be made of other ingredients, and because you don't know what went into the same ovens and utensils or factories before without being properly cleaned in between. So for all those reasons, it needs to be certified kosher for Passover.
What about lentils?
We don't eat lentils on Passover. Ashkenazic Jews. Sephardim do.
What about cassia flour?
I'm not sure what that is. I don't know.
Almond flour?
Almonds are fine. Almonds are definitely fine.
Cassia's probably fine too. Okay.
Okay.
I make cassia.
So what we spoke about till now is making sure not to eat chametz. But there's another prohibition, which is not to benefit from chametz on Passover, not to own chametz on Passover. So in addition to the prohibition of not eating or benefiting from chametz over Passover, there's a different prohibition in the Torah. The Torah says, Lo yera'eh lecha chametz v'lo yimatzeh. And the chametz shall not be seen or found in your possession on Passover. According to our oral tradition, we're not banned from looking at chametz. We're banned from owning chametz. We're not allowed to own chametz over Passover. Chametz is anything that is made from one of 5 grains: wheat, barley, oats, rye, or spelt, and has fermented in any way. Now, these flours or grains ferment fairly quickly. So if it's been made into anything, virtually anything, and has not, other than matzah, where it was specially kept to make sure it doesn't ferment, it would be considered chametz. So anything that you buy that has one of those grains, including something that has malt in it, malt is often from those grains, would be considered chametz. So we are prohibited not just not to eat it, but not to own it over Passover. We're not allowed to have it in our possessions. In addition, we're not allowed to own it. In addition to the prohibition of not owning chametz on Passover, if a Jew did own chametz on Passover, and then after Passover ends, it's forbidden to eat it forever. It's called chametz she'avar alav hapesach. Chametz that was owned by a Jew on Passover is banned. We're never allowed to eat it. So, to avoid owning chametz on Passover, the Torah requires us to destroy any chametz in our possession before midday on the day before Passover. So on the eve of Passover, from midday on, we're already not allowed to eat or own chametz. The Torah says before that, you have to destroy all chametz in your possession. That's a command. Destroy it. The way we destroy it is by burning it. We burn our chametz, and we do that on Monday morning. We have a custom. We take some chametz, and we burn it to fulfill the mitzvah of destroying chametz before Passover. Now, while the Torah says not to do it from midday on the day before Passover, not to own chametz, and to destroy the chametz before midday on the day before Passover. Our sages extended that just a little bit by an hour, and they said destroy your chametz an hour before midday, in order that you don't miss the time by accident because you were going too slow, or you didn't notice the time, so you don't accidentally miss the time and you don't come close to transgress the prohibition of owning chametz on Passover. They said you should burn it more than an hour before midday, and already an hour before midday we should not own any chametz. So before that, in order not to own any chametz, our sages said on the eve before Passover, that would be Sunday night this year, we should search for chametz all over our house. We should do a search right after dark, and we should look for chametz all over our house. We'll talk about it more next Sunday, the search and how it's done. But we look throughout our house to see if we can find any chametz. Even before that, before the eve before Passover, before the search, our sages say that one should clean through their entire house in the days, weeks leading up to Passover to make sure that there is no chametz anywhere in the house. You don't know where someone may have placed chametz. There may be places where there are chametz. If you know that you never bring chametz into a particular room, you don't need to clean and search that room. But if you sometimes do eat in that room and you may have accidentally brought chametz, or maybe if you have children, the children may have done so, you must search that room and clean it for chametz beforehand, and you must search it on the eve before Passover. And just in case you did miss something, there is chametz somewhere hiding in your house that you do not know about, what we do is, on the day before Passover, when we burn our chametz, we also make a declaration that we say all chametz that may be in our possession that we don't know about, or maybe that we knew about or we forgot, is all ownerless. We remove any ownership we have from that chametz. It's not mine anymore. So even if it's there lying somewhere in my house, it's not mine anymore. So that way I do not own any chametz on Passover.
What about like your car? Like if you don't eat in your car.
If you never eat in your car, you don't need to check your car. I don't know too many people like that. I'm sure there are some. If you do eat in your car, then you absolutely need to clean your car before Passover, and you need to check your car for chametz before Passover.
But you can't put groceries in your car.
Well, the groceries, hopefully you always take out of your car. They don't get lost in there. But most people eat in their car, so it's still a problem. What happens if a Jew has chametz that they don't want to get rid of? They have a cake, they have a bottle of whiskey that they don't want to get rid of, they don't want to eat before Passover, they can't drink that much before Passover, and they're saving it for something, they want to have it after Passover. So what do? You're not allowed to own any chametz on Passover. So in a book called the Tosefta, which was written right after the Mishnah in the 3rd century or in the 200s, it gives us a scenario. There was a Jew who is traveling by boat. Now in those days, when they would travel by boat, the boats moved with oarsmen, right? The oarsmen moved boats. They moved very, very slowly. So a boat trip across the Mediterranean, for example, say from Israel to Spain, or you want to take a boat trip from Israel to India, where they traded also, right? Could be a couple-month trip. So you're going to be on the boat over Passover. Now, when you're on the boat, you take all your provisions for the entire trip with you. Now, let's say they're going to be on the boat over Passover. So if you're on the boat over Passover, then you can't have any chametz on Passover. You get rid of all your chametz before Passover. You still have another 2 months till you get to port. What are you going to eat for the next 2 months? You're going to eat matzah for 2 months after Passover? So the Tosefta says that you have a simple solution, which is before Passover, the Jew can take all of his chametz that he has stored to eat after Passover, and he can sell it to a non-Jewish fellow traveler and give it to the non-Jew. The non-Jew now has all his chametz. He has the money, and then after Passover, he can go back to the non-Jew, offer to purchase it back from him, and get his chametz back. And that way, he did not own the chametz over Passover. The non-Jew, only a Jew is commanded not to own chametz on Passover. A non-Jew has no such commandment. They're not commanded not to own chametz on Passover. So by selling the chametz to the non-Jew, the Jew avoids the prohibition. And they also, remember, not only are they avoiding the prohibition of not owning chametz on Passover, also any chametz that a Jew does own on Passover cannot be eaten after Passover. But because this chametz was owned by a non-Jew over Passover, it now can be eaten after Passover. So the Jews given the chametz to the non-Jew gave them the money. After Passover, the Jew goes and buys back his chametz. So this was the original system. This is what they did. This is what the Tosefta describes, and this is described by many, many, many other sources. It doesn't seem to have been that common. But when someone needed to sell their chametz, that's what they did. They gave all their chametz to the non-Jew. The non-Jew paid them for it. And then after Passover, if they wanted to, they purchased it back from the non-Jew. When would someone have done such a thing? Probably when they were traveling. Whether traveling in a caravan across, large uninhabited areas, or traveling on a boat. I mean, if you're at home, then you could just bake bread the day after Passover, right? There's no need to hold your chametz till later. So it was probably mostly done for travelers. It's unlikely that there were too many other scenarios in which this kind of thing was done. Most people didn't do this. Remember, they didn't have preservatives in their bread. And they didn't have freezers to freeze their bread. So they baked fresh bread till fairly recently, till 100 years ago. Everyone baked fresh bread every single day. That's what you did. You woke up in the morning, you baked your bread. Because otherwise, if you didn't break your bread that morning, you didn't have bread. Bread from the previous day would already be somewhat stale. They didn't even have plastic bags, Ziploc bags to put it in. So your bread would already be somewhat stale, even if maybe you wrapped it in paper or something. After 2 days, it's not edible anymore. It's totally stale, right? There's no preservatives in it. So people really just did this. They would use stale bread when they did travel long journeys. What did they do? They ate stale bread. They would maybe dry out their bread into crackers so that it was kind of more of a cracker. So it was easier to eat, make it thin so you could break it and tear it or bite into it. Or sometimes they would soften it with dips. But when they would travel, they would have stale bread. But normally they would have, fresh bread every day. There was no need normally to sell your chametz. It was only done really by travelers. So this continued from when the Tosefta was written in the 300s and continued till around the 16th century. So for probably 1300 years. In the 16th century, they came up with this amazing new invention. It wasn't actually a new invention, but it became commercialized. This new thing called vodka. Vodka was the first form of spirits. It was actually developed around the same time as whiskey was developed in Britain. But while whiskey remained in the British Isles mostly, vodka was used all over Europe. And these were essentially strong alcohols, better than beer, which they of course had for a very, very long time, better than beer, cheap, much, much cheaper and easier to make than wine. And it was a great thing. Why should you drink wine and beer if you could drink vodka? So vodka became the new drink in Europe started in the early 1500s, 16th century. So commercial vodka, from when it appears in Europe, it spreads very, very, very quickly. Everybody drinks it. Everyone's a big fan of it. It becomes very, very, very popular. So now Jews had been in the wine business and other spirits. They had other spirits like liqueurs and date wines and things like that for thousands of years. But Jews who had been in the alcohol business of what it had been, mostly wine, for thousands of years. It was a very Jewish business throughout history. Jews dominated the business in Europe throughout at least the last 1,000 years or more, and dominated the business in other places even before that. So, of course, Jews moved into the vodka business. And so many Jews opened vodka distilleries, and they dominated the business in Europe for a very long time. And so Jews owned distilleries. Many Jews had distilleries. Many Jews were traders in that they would purchase barrels of vodka from distilleries and sell them to various, taverns and towns in different places. And many Jews were tavern owners. Today they call it a bar, right? They would own bars where they would actually sell it to the customers. They would either sell directly bottles of vodka or they would sell drinks, so people would come in for a drink. But they owned, many Jews owned taverns. And it became a really, really big business. There was a problem, however. Vodka is mostly made from wheat. It's mostly made from wheat, barley. It's made from grains mostly, and it could be made from potatoes, but it was largely made from wheat. It's the easiest way to make it, which would mean that vodka is, if it's made from wheat, it's chametz. And so now these Jewish vodka makers, distributors, sellers, right, store owners, they could not own their vodka over Passover. That is prohibited. You cannot own your vodka on Passover. And if you do own it on Passover, it's forbidden for any Jew to use it, to eat it, to drink it, because it becomes chametz shabar alav haPesach, chametz owned by a non-Jew over Passover. Problem is that unlike the food you have stored for the next few weeks when you're traveling on the boat, where you could just hand to the non-Jew and the non-Jew gives you cash, if you own a distillery, how do you hand all the vodka to the non-Jew? You can't pick it up, right? Or if you own a warehouse, or even a tavern with a bunch of barrels of it, how do you sell it to the non-Jew? It's also very expensive. Which person has money to purchase an entire distillery, or a warehouse of vodka, or even the tavern's storehouse or a storage room of vodka? Who has the money to purchase that? So they had to figure out a workaround. And the rabbis did, of course, figured out a workaround. And the first one who speaks about this is Rabbi Yoel Sirkis in his book Bayit Chadash, or Bach as it's known. And he's known as the Bach. That's an acronym for the name of his book. And he lived late 16th century, at the end of the 1500s. And he writes that what they do is they can sell it to a non-Jew as is, sell the vodka where it is to a non-Jew, and rent the room where it is to the non-Jew. So then you don't actually have to give it to the non-Jew, you just rent the distillery or the storage house or the storage room in the tavern, rent it to the non-Jew for the duration of Passover, sell all of the barrels where they are, and they're in his possession, they're in his room or in his distillery because you've rented it for the real estate to the non-Jew over Passover. Now the non-Jew doesn't have money to pay for it, to purchase an entire distillery. So what you do is they would have the non-Jew put down a down payment for the amount of the sale with a commitment to come up with the rest of the money within a certain time. You can make a sale with a down payment, finalize the sale, and the sale is final. It's already been sold, but you still need to come up with the money. We often sell things like that, right? Where you get a 30-day or whatever, 60 days to come up with the money, or retroactively the sale is canceled. So usually, and then the Jew comes after Passover and then can purchase it back for the same agreed upon price. Usually the Jew would give a little bit of a higher price than the original sale price, and that way the non-Jew makes money on the whole deal, so that earns their cooperation. They know they're going to make money from it, and so this became the way to do it. This is the way Jews would sell their chametz. Again, mostly the people here selling their chametz were mostly people in the vodka business, in the alcohol business, which was many Jews were in this alcohol business. It was a business dominated by Jews all across Europe, from really in Central Europe, in Eastern Europe, even later in Western Europe. It was a business dominated by Jews. So there were Jews that needed to do this. Now, many Jews struggled, and we know that by the 17th century, 1600s, mid-1600s, this was widely done. And so now many Jews struggled to write their own contracts. So what they actually started doing is they would print standard contracts, because it's something everyone's doing. So they would print standard contracts. You could just copy it. You just hand copy it, and you get the exact wording, correct wording of how to write it correctly. Just fill in the names, location, amount, right? And kind of a space to fill in different things. I guess the original legal Zoom, right? You have kind of the standard contracts and you just fill it out. So a template for the contracts. In fact, in many 17th and 18th century Haggadahs, they would even in the Haggadah they would print the wording for the template of the sale of your one's chametz. If one wanted to sell it to a non-Jew, it was just a convenient place to put it where people could easily find it when they needed it. Yes, Deb?
Wouldn't it be easier just to ask a neighbor, can you hold this for a week? No.
Pick up the entire distillery?
Why do you have to sell it?
Or why can't you gift it?
No, why can't you just ask them to hold it for you?
Well, you can't lend it because if you lend it, you still own it.
Ask them to hold it for you.
You can gift it to them.
Whatever.
So the problem is that's an excellent question.
Wouldn't it be a lot easier?
Excellent question. So you cannot lend it to a non-Jew. If you lend it, you still own it. You can, in theory, gift it, and in fact, the Tosefta we mentioned earlier raises that possibility that instead of selling you the fellow on the boat, instead of selling their chametz to non-Jew, just gift it to the non-Jew. And in theory, they can. The problem is that in this new system, where it's really just a contractual thing, but nothing's actually changing hands, right? Because the distillery is sitting exactly where it always stood, and the warehouse is sitting exactly where it always sat. Right? Nothing's moving. So in such a thing, if I gift it to you and then you gift it back to me, it doesn't sound like a legitimate contract. So therefore, we do an actual legal sale. A sale is a binding thing. It's much stronger than just a gift.
Purpose not to have it in your house.
Not to own it. Not to own it. Very clear. It's allowed to be in your house if it belongs to a non-Jew. You're not allowed to own it. You're not allowed to own it. If you own it, it's in the non-Jew's house, you still have a problem. You're not allowed to own it. That's the issue. Yes, Susan?
Is there a prohibition of not eating matzah before, like within 30 days of...
There is a prohibition not to eat matzah on the day before Passover and a custom by some not to eat matzah in the 30 days before Passover. But that's not directly relevant to this. Okay.
I have a question. Have you ever heard...
Let's continue and I'll take questions. So now the thing with this contract that was drawn up is it must be a legal contract, which is why it must be something that's legally binding. And it must be binding in two systems of law. It must be binding both under Jewish law, so that Jewishly you don't own it, as well as under the law of the land. Because if the government won't recognize the sale, then of what value is the sale, right? It's not a real sale if the government won't recognize it, if the courts won't recognize it. And so in the 18th century, the Alter Rebbe, Reb Shneur Zalman of Liadi, who we've done a class about, and was a great Torah scholar, he raised an issue with the contract that people were using, which is as follows. If you sell your distillery or your warehouse or your storeroom in your tavern to a non-Jew, and with all your vodka there, and this thing is worth thousands, tens of thousands of whatever currency they had. It's worth a very large amount of money. And the non-Jew just puts down a deposit with a commitment to pay the rest. The law is, at least under Jewish law, if you know that they're never going to be able to come up with the money, the sale is not valid. Because they're not going to come up with the money. What sort of sale is that? So he argued, they're never going to be able to come up with that kind of money. They don't have this kind of money. What kind of sale is that? That's not a valid sale. So he came up with a workaround. And he said as follows. The solution is, what you can do is get another Jew to guarantee the sale. You can sell something and you can get someone else to then guarantee, or you could, let's say you borrow money and then you get a guarantor to guarantee that if the borrower can't pay, the guarantor will pay. You could do the same thing in a sale, where the buyer says, I'm going to put down a deposit now, I owe you the rest, and then you have a guarantor. If the buyer doesn't come back with the money, then the guarantor can pay the money, right? What you can even do, a cosigner, right? What What you can even do is you can have a cosigner that in Hebrew we call it an Arif Kablan, a cosigner who has first responsibility. So normally the guarantor or the cosigner is the backup. If the person who's buying it cannot come up with the money, you go to the backup, to the guarantor. But you can also do it the other way, where you first go to the guarantor for the money. You don't even bother going to the original buyer, and then the guarantor has to go and claim their money that the buyer owes them directly. They could go and sue the buyer because, right, the guarantor who guaranteed the money still can go claim the money, right? If you guarantee a loan and you end up having to pay up for the borrower who fails to pay up their loan, right, the guarantor can still go sue the borrower for the money to get the money back. So his suggestion was have another Jew serve as this guarantor, and a first-party guarantor, in other words, whom the seller can come initially back to for the money, for the full value of whatever you are selling. And then, even if this second person, this Jew, doesn't really have the money to pay for an entire distillery, but he doesn't want his fellow Jew to own chametz over Passover. So he's going to find a way to raise the money, including going back to the Jew himself who sold the chametz and asking him for the money, right? So therefore, because he'll be determined to ensure that the sale is valid, therefore such a sale then, even if the money is going to be hard to find, the sale therefore would be valid. These sales also must be valid based under the legal code of the land, under the local laws. So it must be written in a way that it's valid under the local laws. One issue that was raised by the Chatam Sofer, we did a class about him a few months ago, Rav Moshe Sofer in the early 19th century. He lived in today's Slovakia, but it was then the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the Austrian Empire. An issue raised by him was, well, if this is a valid legal sale, then it needs to be reported to the government and you need to pay sales tax. Surprise, surprise, right? So in the Austrian Empire, they actually got a government rule passed that for those selling chametz for Passover, that they're then going to buy back, they are exempt from sales tax. Luckily here, we don't really have that issue because the law, at least in California, and I believe in every state that has sales tax, is that if you sell something, you are technically required to pay sales. The seller is required under California state law to pay sales tax. Even if you sell something privately, by the way, if you sell something just to, your neighbor, your friend, you are legally obliged to pay to report it and pay sales tax. But if you offer a refund, in other words, if they give it back to you and you give them back the money, then you are not obligated to pay sales tax. When we sell the chametz before Passover, we later end up buying it back from the non-Jew after Passover, right? So legally, we're not actually required to pay sales tax, but it is a legal sale, right? If the non-Jew chooses not to sell it back, then we got to worry about sales tax. So for the 17th and 18th centuries, people who were selling their chametz were mostly alcohol distillery owners, dealers, tavern owners, people involved in the alcohol business in some way or another, and the chametz they were selling was vodka. It was really only now people generally sold the chametz by themselves. They had, as we said, templates, and what they would generally do is they would go to the local rabbi, they would bring a non-Jewish friend, and the local rabbi would fill out the contract for them, make sure it's all legal, finalize it for them, because not everyone's a lawyer or a scholar and knows how to do it properly. And whoever, all the dealers in town, all the people in the alcohol business would sell their chametz. By the early 19th century, the prices of vodka came down significantly, and it became much, much cheaper. And so people began to purchase their own private vodka. It wasn't just that you went to the tavern to buy vodka, right? But people had their own stashes of vodka. People would buy bottles and drink it themselves, or drink it at parties. In earlier years when it was very expensive, people didn't buy it themselves. But as the prices went down with commercialization and production increased, people were able to buy their own bottles. People had their own bottles of vodka at home. And so with people had their own bottles. Now they didn't want to get rid of it before Passover. They didn't want to have to drink it all or throw it out. So it was still pricey. And so people who were not involved in the alcohol business also began to sell their chametz before Passover to a non-Jew. And it soon became that there were way too many people in the average town selling their chametz for the rabbi to sit with each one and to go through a sale for each one. So gradually, in the early 19th century, rabbis came up with another solution, which is that rather than having each person sell their chametz to a non-Jew, what they did is every person would basically sign a form, a document that appointed the rabbi as their agent to sell their chametz on their behalf. And they would sign this form, and they would give it to the rabbi, and then the rabbi would then call in a non-Jew, and he would sell on behalf of all the various people in the community who want to sell their chametz, he would sell their chametz to the non-Jew. So this was already done, this has been done for about 200 years since people began to have their own chametz. This became an even bigger issue in the 20th century because with commercialization of food, but until the early 20th century, everyone baked their own bread or bought it in the bakery, fresh from the bakery every day. Commercialization of food allowed for, firstly, all sorts of new foods that maybe you can't keep over time. Cereals, pasta, cookies, things that last for weeks, for months, for years. Don't need to throw all that out. It wasn't just bread anymore. In addition, by mid or 1920s, 1930s, people began to get freezers. They could freeze bread, freeze foods that are chametz. And so now everyone has chametz in their pantry, and you're not going to eat it all before Passover, so everyone needs to sell their chametz. So today, the way we do it, I'll soon give you some details of exactly how it's done, is that everyone in the community therefore signs the document, making the rabbi their agent to sell their chametz, and the rabbi sells the chametz of the whole community to a non-Jew on behalf of the entire community. So how practically is this done? So the rabbi creates a form that essentially says that I, the undersigned, give the rabbi the power, the agency to sell my chametz on my behalf. And in the days and weeks before Passover, the rabbi distributes this form to the community. People fill in this document with their names, and they write the location where the chametz is going to be, right, the address of exactly where it is. They sign it to make it legally binding, and then they give it to the rabbi. Today, this can also be done online using online forms, because legally the courts have widely ruled that hitting a submit button after hitting the I agree to all the above and hitting submit is a legally binding contract, and that's the law today. So it's a legally binding contract. You can do it, or you can, and it's not a very company, it's just an agency. You're just not actually selling anything. You're just giving the rabbi agency. You can do it online as well. Then the rabbi collects all of these forms together, puts them in a file, and on a folder. On the day before Passover, in late morning, before that last hour before midday, the rabbi meets with the non-Jew and a second Jew who will be the guarantor. And they use a pre-drafted document that's usually written out in advance that essentially says that they are selling, the rabbi is selling the non-Jew all the chametz belonging to all the members of the community who filled out the forms in this folder and found in all the locations written down on the forms in this folder. The agreement says that the non-Jew agrees to pay fair market value for all the chametz, whatever fair market value it can realistically be sold for. He agrees to pay fair market value minus a stipulated amount, usually a couple $100 or something, fair market value minus that amount, and that amount which is essentially if he would then keep it and then sell it on the market of whatever it's worth, right? Your old pasta might not be worth very much, but he sells it on the market, whatever it's worth, because he purchased it for fair market value minus a few $100s. If he then sells it at fair market value, he's made a few $100s, right? So that's his profit. So it makes it worth it for him, right? So the agreement also requires the non-Jew to give a token deposit, usually a few dollars, $10, $20 immediately. And the rest is going to be due on the day after Passover. So you have essentially, this is the day before Passover. Passover is 8 days. You have 9 days to, the non-Jew has 9 days to pay back to pay up the rest of the value, to evaluate it, figure out how much it's all worth, and then pay up the rest. The agreement also stimulates that the non-Jew is going to rent all of these locations that the chametz is in. In other words, any pantry or freezer or any place that has been set aside for the chametz in these locations, that the non-Jew is going to rent them until the day after Passover for a token amount, $20. That's fine. They can rent it for a small amount. And the agreement also allows the non-Jew to walk into any location stipulated on these documents. So they can walk into your house, they have legal right to find the chametz, and they will be pointed to where your chametz is, and they can empty it out if they choose to over Passover. They have that legal right? So you're giving them access, right? You have to give them legal access to the chametz. The agreement further says that in event that the non-Jew fails to come up with the money, or if the people who's selling their chametz can collect the full amount, or even to start with, go to the Jew serving as a guarantor to collect the full value of the chametz once on the deadline, or once the deadline is passed, the day after Passover. The document also stipulates that if the non-Jew is unable or unwilling to come up with the rest of the money, then the sellers can choose to purchase back their chametz before the stipulated date, the day after Passover. So the non-Jew, the rabbi, and the guarantor then all sign the document. They shake hands, finalizing the agreement. They lift up a handkerchief, which is the way you finalize an agreement in Jewish traditions. So under Jewish law, when we finalize something, the common thing that you do is you shake hands, you sign on it, but under Jewish law, you lift up a handkerchief. Each side lifts up a handkerchief. It's a way of finalizing an agreement. And then each participant is given a copy of the document, and the non-Jew is given the file with the folder with all the names of people selling chametz and all the places where the chametz will be. Now, all that chametz in the community belongs to him, and the Jews no longer own the chametz over Passover. Then after Passover, the rabbi and the non-Jew meet again. The rabbi offers to purchase back the chametz from the non-Jew at its full value. Now remember, originally the non-Jew purchased it at its full value minus $100 or a few $100s. Now the rabbi is purchasing it back at full value, which means that he has to give the deposit back, the $20 deposit back to the non-Jew. He also has to give him that $100 that, because he's selling it, he's basically buying back for $100 more. He gives it to the non-Jew, and that's his profit. And now the people in the community own their chametz once again, and it didn't belong to Jews over Passover, and they are now able to eat it. So today, virtually every Jew who wants to avoid owning chametz on Passover has some chametz somewhere, whether in beer or whiskey, or whiskey is also made from grain, or vodka or some other alcohols, or just cakes in the freezer, or pasta, or cereals, or any other thing that may be chametz, and they don't want to throw it out, and so therefore the standard is that everyone signs a document delegating the rabbi, giving the rabbi the power, the agency, to sell their chametz on their behalf. Now the Rebbe is encouraged that we should always help Jews do as many mitzvahs as possible. Even if they're not doing one mitzvah, that's not an excuse not to do other mitzvahs. And therefore the Rebbe said, this mitzvah of not owning chametz on Passover is super easy. Even a Jew who does not stop eating chametz on Passover, they don't observe Passover for whatever reason, and they continue to eat chametz on Passover, let alone try to remove all chametz from their possession and not own chametz on Passover, even such a Jew who is transgressing the prohibition of not eating chametz on Passover, and perhaps not even making a seder and not eating matzah. But even so, they can easily avoid the prohibition of owning chametz on Passover and avoid the prohibition of eating chametz after Passover that was owned by a Jew on Passover by just signing a simple document. It's an easy thing to do. And the Rebbe strongly believe that even if a Jew is not doing one mitzvah, maybe they're eating chametz on Passover, they should still be encouraged to do other mitzvahs. At least they shouldn't own that chametz that they're eating. At least they're fulfilling another mitzvah. Removing all chametz, stopping to eat chametz on Passover is not easy for everyone. It could be challenging for some people. They don't do it. They're not careful about it. They can't go without their daily muffin or whatever they have every morning, right? Their daily bagel. So some people might find it very hard. But signing a delegation document that you delegate the rabbi to sell your chametz and having him sell it for you is easy. It takes about 20 seconds. And with that, you've fulfilled a mitzvah. And so therefore the Rebbe encouraged that we should get every single Jew, no matter their observance, no matter whether they observe Passover, no matter whether they eat chametz or don't eat chametz on Passover, we should encourage every single Jew to fill out a form delegating the rabbi the power of selling their chametz on Passover. It can be done very easily. And just to conclude, the Baal Shem Tov taught that when we avoid chametz on Passover, God then helps us avoid sin or doing bad a whole year round. So it's a very powerful thing, and so we should definitely try to avoid eating chametz on Passover, but also we should take that 20 seconds or less than 60 seconds it takes to fill out one of these forms, and any Jew you should get them to fill out the form as well. So I have brought over here the delegation of power to sell chametz forms. I'm going to pass them around. Please fill them out if you have not yet done so. And those listening online or virtually who do not have the forms in front of you, you can also go online to jccmb.com, our website, /sell chametz. SELLCHAMETZ, and you can over there sell your chametz as well, delegate the rabbi the power to sell your chametz. Please do so as soon as possible so you do not forget. You have till next Sunday to do it, but please do it sooner rather than later so you do not forget. Once again, if you don't yet have plans for the Seder, please, we'd love for you to join our Seder. We also have shmura matzah here. If you are making your own Seder, or going to a Seder, I have shmura matzah here for you. If you know any other Jew who you'd like to give shmura matzah to, we're giving them out to any Jew who needs. And also one last thing I mentioned earlier, this coming Friday night, again, we have a dinner for the Rebbe's birthday, and we'd love for you to join us for that as well. You can go on our website, jccmb.com, to sign up for it.
What time is the dinner?
7:30.